Here we go. All right. So welcome everyone. Happy Wednesday for women visionaries in transition who want to cultivate a solid foundation of self-care practices that provide support and stability during times of change. I am the Change Guide for Growth. And so we are jumping on for my Visionaries in Transition Facebook Live series, where I interview the amazing and inspiring impact makers in my network to discuss the transitions that have shaped their lives and businesses, as well as my own. So if you are joining us, please like, comment, share, and subscribe if you're on YouTube to let us know that you're here. And today I'm talking to Arika, who owns the Middle Path EcoSolutions company, and I'm so glad to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So tell me your backstory. How did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, so I started off as a researcher essentially, but I would say probably what motivated me to be a researcher is I really just wanted to travel. I wanted to learn about different places, communities, people. And I started with working with, I also did some travel. I worked in subsistence-based communities, and I would have to say that that's something that really inspires me and leads the way. And I'm learning today, it really leads the way that I view my world. So I started off as a researcher. I did work first I did work with home gardens. So I generally did work with ethnobotany, ethnoecology types of things that really helped me to learn about how people interact with their environment. And then from there, after being a researcher academic, I went into the entrepreneurial space. And I'd have to say that it was not an easy thing to transition into. It was really hard to figure out what I was good at and what I wanted to do. I think that was the toughest part. And it took me about 5 years to figure that out. So today I work with community building, and it is certainly a passion for me. And I realize now with my background in academia and research consulting that it's really brought me to where I am today.
Yeah, ethnobiology. I didn't even realize that was a thing, but that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that's fascinating. I've always been fascinated by the intersection of people and how they interact with the world around them. I come from the art history world, so I think about more of culture creation, but I think that totally applies to the biological world around us as well.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. And I think that, the lens I take is that people and their environment is inseparable. So if you think about ecology, the way we learned or often learn about ecology in school, we think it's everybody except humans. Humans are something that's outside of this world, of this system. And just doing this kind of paradigm shift of like, no, actually, we're all connected. We are on equal terms with all these other species that are out there, and we need to find a way to all live together. I think it really changes the way that we think about our place in the world. And so in the work that I do, that shows up by thinking about like, we are communities, but I mean, we are communities of people, but we're also communities within a larger ecosystem of our place and our environment. So trying to always remember that and keeping our feet on the ground and getting outside and realizing that we're not separate from our world, even if we're working virtually like I do today. It's my world is not in this little frame. It seems like it sometimes, but once we leave that frame, we are in a real world and we have real impact.
Totally. I love that you use the phrase, keep our feet on the ground. Like it can be metaphorical and literal, like going out and walking in nature and putting your bare feet in the grass or in the sand or in the water and really understanding that deeper connection to the world around us.
Yeah, that's right. And I think also that when I kind of come up to a challenge or I'm wondering, things start feeling really complex. I think back to the way that, kind of the most simplest way of living, which is the way that subsistence-based communities live. And so when I think, so subsistence-based communities being people who meet most of their needs based on the local environment around them. And for me, that's a real inspiration because, when we think about it, a lot of things that we worry about or are concerned about, does it really, map to what our real needs are? And could we just be happier if we just kind of thought about those basic needs? And that really keeps me grounded.
Totally, totally. Yeah. I mean, I have to go outside and ground myself in nature on a daily basis, like just to make sure that I don't get lost in this virtual world that we live in.
Yes, yeah, definitely. Totally agree.
Cool. So what kind of transitions have shaped your journey, either in life or business?
Yeah. I think that going a lot of the travel that I did, as I mentioned, it's like it really impacts me today. And I think I didn't really realize it. I mean, this might be like sort of a lesson learned that I can offer is, when I was younger or, when I was in this more of an exploratory like frame of mind, it was like I didn't really know why I was doing this or what value I was getting out of the travel I did. So I always kind of kept it separated from my real life. It was like my hobby, that I didn't really talk about it because I was a serious academic,
Yeah, yeah.
and now today, doing the work that I do, one of the reasons I feel so inspired today in my work is seeing all of these pieces of my life come together. And it has meaning for me now in a way that it didn't used to. Before it was just a very desperate sort of thing, where I did that over there, but I didn't talk. And when I talk to these people, I talk about this thing. And my goal when I was traveling was always to stay within communities and stay with people. And that was what I wanted to do. So and now today I like talk about these experiences that I had of like these different places in the world and staying with these different ethnic communities and in their houses and trying to be, like live the life that they lived. And when I did my research, I was looking at a livelihood system. So how do people live their lives and what is it that causes them to make choices about their lives? And I looked at this in a kind of a resource, access to resources versus opportunities versus challenges versus, like, for example, things that you have like your social capital or versus, the political framing that you're in. And that's a lens that I still use today. So, and I think like, when I was, so I did research in Thailand, I did research in Brazil. And those are two really different cultures and it was in-depth research. It's like 5 years in one place, 5 years, so it was very in-depth. And I think, now that I look back, I'm like, oh, the reason I did that was because I really just wanted this really broad cultural understanding of the way we like, what is our place in the world? Another thing that really impacted me was that I studied art. I studied science. I was always a science person. But in the middle of my undergrad, I switched to art and I did fine arts for a year and a half. I did a lot of drawing. And I think that having that type of like differing frame, I mean, maybe that's a pattern in my life. I'm always looking for these kind of contrasting types of experiences. And so it gave me sort of a holistic perspective, I think, into the way I approach things and think about things. And then, trying to get into that mindset of like when I was working with, doing research in this space of ethnoecology and natural resource management and use. And, it's like getting in people's heads and minds about like, why do they choose to live like this? And, what are the choices that they make? And, and I think another really big, so that was kind of, I think of it as like, that was my sort of academic research time period, that was sort of like phase one. And then phase two, I think, was when I left academia. I went in, I had a postdoc. And at the same time, I also became a mother. Academia was no longer a good fit. Academia isn't always so welcoming to mothers, I would say. So my academic career ended basically. And then I was a new mother. And motherhood has just been such a big phase. It's really an identity change, I would say, because it's like, and that's part of like, when I heard about it, I was like, no, that's not going to happen to me. My identity is not going anywhere, but at the same time, it doesn't feel like I lost anything. It feels like I really gained this more like broader perspective. So, and it is sort of this identity adjustment. So now it's like, you got to make space now. It's like before my life was like, it was this, and now I'm a mother. And now it's like, I had to create that space and become like sort of a different person. And my life, I think is better for that. So, and then from there, it was kind of like a paradigm shift for like, well, what is it that I really want? Because now I have this, now my family is like, my family has grown and like that. they are sort of the center of my life and what, a lot of my joy. So from there, I really went to this path of being more independent and what type of life do I want to build, not just for me, but for my family. And so it was a real shift.
Yeah, well, I hear this all the time that motherhood is a primary shift into entrepreneurship for women. Like I hear that from corporate women, I hear that from academic women, like all over the board. When you have that maternity leave or you take a break to take care of the kid for however long, it's a time for self-reflection. It's a time for self-reimagining and really figuring out how you want to structure your life so that you can have it all. I call it the yes and approach. Like that's kind of what you're talking about too with your academic work and your traveling is like, let's do yes and instead of having these compartmentalized experiences that are almost like silos in their own experience. And motherhood is that yes and experience as well.
Yeah, yes, I totally agree. And I would say that, maybe that motherhood, that sort of shift, and it wasn't just a shift within myself, but I think this world around me, was kind of like, oh, now you're a mother. So now you're like this, but in a sort of a positive framing of that, it opened up my mind of like what I could be, and I'm wondering like, if I had just sort of stayed the course and maybe like, just was like, I'm an academic, I'm headed on the academic route, I'm going to be a faculty member or whatever it is, no children, just do that. I would say that, I probably would have been a much more narrower sort of perspective onto my life. And I think, kind of opening up that box of like, no, now you're something else, whether you like it or not, you transitioned to this other thing. It opened up that opportunity to bring in together all these pieces. And I'm just like, this is all me. And now it finally makes sense. Like, that's why I did that. It wasn't just some random thing I did in my 20s. It was like, no, I did that because I was charting my own path.
Yeah.
And so, and I think that's like, to me is just like, it really gives me a lot of inspiration for what I'm doing now.
Yeah, I feel like it's a process of collecting all the puzzle pieces, like as you grow up, as you evolve, you get more and more puzzle pieces, you find more and more puzzle pieces. And then one day you realize it makes a picture. You're like, oh, all of these pieces do connect to one another and it makes a complete picture. And oh my God, like what a concept. Instead of feeling like you have all of these like compartmentalized weird experiences that don't really relate to one another. Like I felt like that for the longest time. I was like, well, I have this interest over here and I have this interest over here and I like this and I like that and I find this interesting, but how does it all interconnect? And it wasn't until last year that I really connected all the pieces and was like, oh.
That's right. Yeah. And I think also the another thing that's kind of been new for me too is kind of this feeling of liberation of being who I want, like who I am, and I think it's part of that permission, like when you're sort of in a, you're in a box or say you're employed by somebody, you sort of live in a box. And then once it's sort of like that box is gone, I think it can be sort of frightening because you're like, well, now what do I do? I'm going to be self-employed. Like, what in the world does that look like? But I think like one thing that's been really wonderful for me is this cultural liberation, which I feel like, I'm still trying to figure it out. But I think that I always felt like, so I'm a first generation Thai American, and that's like a really strong part of my identity. But it was always sort of an identity that I always left to the side because like I live in the US, I'm an American, I need to act like this in these spaces. And I think today there's also a lot more opportunity to be able to own that identity. And that's been a really, that's been a big shift. Somebody recently called me bold and they said, I really appreciate your bold comments. And I was like, yeah, I suppose so. And I sort of feel like maybe that's also my place in this world is to be bold and say the things that, make people uncomfortable, and to make those decisions, whether or not I should say things that make people feel uncomfortable. But I think, as a first generation Thai American, that going back, like after my undergrad, I went to Thailand mostly because I was sort of confused. I was like, it was very muddled, that feeling of like, I sort of don't fit here. I don't fit over there. Like, I don't understand why I'm so like, I felt just so different and out of place. And then spending so much time in Thailand, I was there for 5 years, didn't speak any English, was just like, I'm there to speak Thai, learn Thai. I didn't know how to speak Thai, which is another thing that I felt like was like a gap in my life. And, and then coming back and feeling like, okay, I own this identity. I share these two identities, but they're all me. And I could tell the difference instead of it being like, oh, I like this in the US, it's kind of weird that I do this. It was like, no, it's not weird. It's because that's my Thai culture that is becoming visible here. And so that's another thing that I think, when I think about bringing together these holistic pieces, is that sort of that cultural identity piece is really, I'm starting, and it's a new thing for me. It's like I'm able to finally start bringing it out because I've started to figure out tools for and ways to do that.
Yeah, I find that fascinating. The language piece is so important for cultural identity. Like I read about a lot of this when it comes to Hispanics and Latino cultures and how they have an incorporation of Spanish into their cultural identities. And it's just so important to have that root system to your ancestors, to your history, to your cultural awareness. And I think that's amazing that you identified that and nurtured that for yourself.
Yeah, and that's actually a new concept for me, this idea of language liberation. I'd never heard of this before. And I'd encourage everybody to just look that up, like language liberation. I had this pamphlet that I came across that is, that had some best practices for how to liberate language in your groups or the groups that you facilitate. And just like you said, because language is the doorway into people's background and culture and their ancestry. And so, making just like small shifts about how language shows up, or normalizing different languages in the way, and not having to be like, well, I don't understand. Like, you don't have to understand, it's like the whole point might be that another person is just able to express themselves better in a way that opens the door for more out of the box thinking and more creativity.
Totally. And language shapes our perception of the world around us too. Like Eskimos have 20 different words for snow. Like it shapes our perception of what the world means to us, how we interact with the world. Like language colors everything we do, what words we choose to use, what phrasing we use to choose, idioms, sayings and phrases and slang. Like it vastly affects how we perceive the world around us. And if you want to have that direct tie to your cultural ancestry, to your cultural roots, then language is an obvious connection there.
Yeah. And like one thing I think I've also shifted on is, the goal of community building, when I used to just like maybe a month ago, I was thinking about community building. Community building is about, one of my goals was making sure there was equity there. So like who is being represented, who is being visible, who has a voice, like aiming for that equity in it. And now I think my goal, I've realized, is more, taking that a step further, is making it possible for people to bring their whole selves into a community and be able to discuss things and like put ideas on the table and new ideas and change paradigms by bringing their whole selves to a space, and I think there's still a lot. That's to me is a really exciting frontier of community building. It kind of goes past the idea of equity and goes more into like, a broader perspective of like, if a community, and I think of community building as it's a place where people can come together and create really new ideas and change the way we do things, because I feel like our world is kind of locked into specific views and visions. And if we want to find these more innovative solutions, we've got to look to ourselves. And part of that is bringing those holistic, beings together, where we can all come together and share and like tackle some real challenges and come to some innovative solutions.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. So that's so true. And like, what kind of lessons have you learned along the way during these transitions?
I think like, one thing I think is being listening to myself, and I don't know if that is a real lesson that you can act on, but maybe it's that introspective type of listening of, there's oftentimes people are telling, many times in my life, I have had an idea and people have said, that is a terrible idea. And I really feel, I think I feel like I've found myself to be able to say, no, you know what? I think that I really believe this is a good idea. And, and doing the impossible, like people will say, no, that is a difficult thing to do. And, and having that sort of confidence, and I don't know where it is like to be able to say, oh, this is how you get more confidence. Cause I think there's definitely times, in my life where I feel more confident, I feel less confident. Sometimes I feel like I know what I'm doing. And sometimes I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And it just kind of ebbs and flows. And maybe having that sort of realizing that this too shall pass is okay. Yeah. And maybe I think this curiosity of, what's the next thing? Like it wasn't I think earlier this year, I was kind of like, what am I doing with this consultant? Do I even really want to do this? Like, why am I working so hard and like not feeling like feel like I'm treading water as like, maybe I should do like, I think every, entrepreneur thinks that like, oh, maybe I should just go back and get a job. It'd be so much easier. And then I could just have my weekends, and not think about this stuff. But then it's like, being curious about what's the next thing or trying to find more inspiration and where does that inspiration come from? And oftentimes I find it from other people. One of the things I've been doing more recently is just thinking about, I think I finally have figured out what networking is about. It took me like my whole career to figure out what networking is about, And, and to me, it's like around partnerships. Yeah. So it's not just like networking about, hey, I do this. Hey, what do you do? It's more about like, hey, how can we work together? How can we help each other and meet our goals together? What are ways that we can complement each other? And then I think like be bold too is another one. Like, we have a lot of fear around what other people think. And I think sometimes there are some things we need to challenge more, and it's okay to say these things. Like my husband tells me sometimes, I think he's like, I think he's trying to say, be less bold. He's like, are you going to get yourself in trouble? And I'm like, I think it's the right thing to do sometimes, is to speak out and say things because nothing changes if you don't. Yeah. And so, so maybe the lesson there is just, follow what you think is right. And don't let people tell you otherwise. And you can do the impossible, honestly. Like, I think so.
Yeah. I mean, that wraps up all of your lessons into one, right? Like listen to yourself so that you know what direction to go, that what is the right direction, and have this bold expression of whatever it is. Like, it's funny, I was laughing at your networking comment because I've realized over the years that it really boils down to this community building aspect that you're talking about too. Like it takes a village. Like, I think we've gotten so removed from that in our modern day society, is like, we're so compartmentalized and separated as individual families and as individual people that we forget that the villages, the communities is what makes progress, that makes things happen, that makes us feel supported and encouraged. And finding those communities and those villages of like-minded individuals and peers is just so important, which you also need to listen to yourself and self-reflect to find out who's actually going to vibe with you.
Yeah, I love that. I hadn't thought of that, honestly. And I think you're absolutely right. It's sort of building who is your community, who aligns with your vision. And I've realized like one thing that I've started doing more recently is, when looking for partnership, it's, what are you like? I know that I'm values driven. That is one of the most important things for me, because when I think about like, what's your goal? Is the goal just to make more money? Like that does not like inspire me in any way, So what I'm always looking for is like, what are your values, and do our values align? And if they do, that's enough for me. And then we can work together and move and try to push that forward. So in a very, so maybe it's this sort of broader picture, systemic sort of pushing the needle that really inspires me. And so I'm always looking for other people who want to do that, and we can build that community in that way.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. I mean, that's again why we are having this conversation. Is like, I've had all these wonderful conversations with people in my network where we share the same values, we have the same visions, and I'm like, man, we need to broadcast this. Oh, I love it. I love it. All right. So what practical tools and practices do you use to support yourself mentally,
Oh, right.
emotionally, physically, spiritually?
Yes, I would say definitely going out into nature. Like I prioritize that
Oh,
as sort of one of my pillars. I mean, my pillars are, when I talk about my pillars, social equity, community
mm,
building, and environmental stewardship.
mm,
But the way that comes into my life is this connection to nature, and what that means to me is just being out there. Like one
mm.
of my goals, for example, is I've always been like, oh, I need to exercise every day. Well, you know what? I'm not really the exercise type of everyday
Yeah,
type of person.
yeah,
Like
yeah, me
that
neither.
doesn't require me. But going outside is a really easy thing to do. If I'm just like go outside every day and spend
Mhm.
at least 10 minutes out there, I'll go outside and I'll be like, I'm going for a walk, I'm going for a run. It's like that is one thing that I'll do. And another thing that I discovered that really helps me is I do, because I work all remotely. So I have thinking days, and my thinking days currently, I mean, they sort of shift depending on the season, but generally I try to keep my Mondays and Wednesdays meeting
Mhm.
free.
Mm,
That just works for me.
mhm.
And so if I want to use that day to just like go out and do something, like go outside, go for a hike, just have a day to myself, I know I have that space. And
Yes.
sometimes it's like, I just want that space to just be on the computer, and maybe I'm writing. I like to write. So maybe I'm just like, I'm working on things that require thought, and where I know I don't have to be anywhere at any time. I just have the whole
Mhm.
day open, and
Mhm.
that for me has been really helps me to stay sort of balanced and productive and
Mhm.
inspired. I feel like I just need that space. Maybe it's also because I'm sort of an introverted person. So I
We
know,
all do.
yeah, like I know, like, okay, I know Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I'm talking to a bunch of people. Great. And then I know I've got a 4-day space where I don't have any obligations to anybody. Like for me, it helps me. It helps me so much. And I think also, my family helps keep me grounded because
Mm,
they're my priority.
yeah.
I think it helps me to structure my life so that I know, like for example, this past weekend was my daughter's 6th birthday. So we had a 3-day birthday celebration. So we started on
Yay.
Saturday, and it was it was a yes day every day, so it's like
Yay.
whatever she says, she wants chocolate ice cream for dinner, we will all have chocolate
Yeah.
ice cream,
Let's do it.
so
I love
so and we've got another birthday. My husband's birthday's in another couple weekends. And so then
it.
it's like, yes, another 3-day celebration of yes days.
Ah,
Um,
I love that.
so we really prioritize that, just like, these just, what we really want to do, which is to be together, be a family, and enjoy our lives and what we do. And that's, as much as I love working, as much as I love and inspired by my work, I also, I do this because I want to have a lifestyle that I want.
Yeah,
So prioritizing my lifestyle our lifestyle is definitely at the top of the list.
totally. I love that. And like, I talk about this all the time when it comes to scheduling yourself. Like, I'm a big fan of flexible time blocking, but I put the emphasis on flexible because you need to build in these buffer areas, these buffer rooms for when the unexpected happens, or when you feel like going outside all day, or when you want to have like a mental health day, or your dog needs to be taken to the vet. Like, there's all kinds of things that happen. And when you are intentional in this scheduling of your time, you have a lot more freedom as a result, like a lot more creative freedom, a lot more thinking freedom. And I love that you intentionally schedule in time like that for yourself, because a lot of people forget that portion. Like, they put everything before themselves, and
Mhm.
then they never have time left over for themselves. It's like the last thought of the day, like, I'll have a glass of wine, I'll have a bubble bath, and that will be enough to like fill me back up after depleting myself all day. But you really have to make it an intentional practice to schedule thinking time, schedule family time, schedule nature time, like whatever your priorities are. Like, making it an intentional practice is it's the most important in my book.
Yeah, no, I agree. Another thing I can add too is that I figured out sort of my times when I like to
Mm,
sit down and write, like my thinking time. Like I'll do like it early in the mornings, like if I'm
mm,
working on some sort of writing project, waking up before everybody else does. But I've also realized that, getting out of my space, getting out of my head, like going on a hike, some of my most interesting ideas come from that
Yeah.
Saturday afternoon hike of like after having a Friday all free of, a thinking time day, and then going through the weekend. It's like some of my best ideas come out from that as I'm just like not thinking about that. I'm just like musing,
Yeah.
so it's just like that musing time is just so
Yeah.
important.
Totally. I mean, there's neuroscience to back that up. This is one of my nerd zones. I'm like, let's talk about how this benefits the brain, because there are neurological processes behind why that happens. And I absolutely love it that you found it intuitively. Oh, all right. Well, I love this. I know we're running out of time. So anything you want to cover before we wrap up for today?
No, I think that's it. This has been a really nice conversation. I've really enjoyed this.
Yeah, me too. I mean, this is powerful stuff that we're talking about here. And I have conversations like this every day. And I'm so happy that I've been able to broadcast these and put them on a broader platform. And because if we don't talk about it, people feel alone in their transitions, in their struggles, in their goals, in their dreams. And I really want to bring more people into the fold and be like, look, we are all going through this. We all have experiences like this. And I want to make sure that people feel welcome and included and inspired by all of this, because I know I'm inspired. So, audience, I definitely encourage you to share your own thoughts and feelings and insights and stories with us as well. We'd love to know how transitions have shaped and impacted you in your own lives. And special thanks to Arika for joining me today. It has been an absolute pleasure.
It's been fun. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, I'm always looking for more guests. I'm actually booked out for this series until the end of July, so it might be a while before I can find you a spot, but please reach out to me if you're interested in coming on. I'll send you the scheduling link. And I can't wait to chat with all of you. So in the meantime, please comment, like, and subscribe or share, depending on what platform you're on, and check out Linktree/Liminal Clarity for all of my links. And then Arika, where can people find you?
You can find me on middlepatheco.com is my website. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Thank you. And I'll put those in the comments to make sure that they're easily accessible for people. So until next time, please remember that your authentic self is extraordinary. It is wonderful, and you owe it to yourself to create the elevated life that you know you are capable of. So take care. I'll see you all next week.